Good afternoon and welcome to NASA's Johnson Space Center. Today is our briefing to preview the maiden flight of the Japanese H-2 transfer vehicle for the International Space Station, which is coming from the Japan Aerospace Exploration Agency. So to provide this briefing, we have some panelists here today, including Mike Suffredini, the International Space Station Program Manager, Dana Weigel, who is the International Space Station Lead Flight Director for the flight, and Masazumi Miyake, the Director of JAXA here in Houston. And we'll open up with comments and then take questions. Mike?
Good afternoon. It's good to be here to talk about the maiden flight of the HTV vehicle for the International Space Station program. You'll hear a lot about it as the next two presenters talk, but it's an amazing vehicle, and it's a pleasure to have it in the fleet. This particular time in the ISS program has been quite busy, as we've been talking about previous to the launch of the 17A flight that's on orbit today. It was good to have the vehicle, the shuttle, launch and get in its window before we had an overlap with the HTV, which is what we were fortunate enough to end up. And so that kind of kept the timeline from being too crowded relative to the undocking of the shuttle and the berthing of the HTV. And so now the next step in the program is to launch the HTV. That's currently planned for the 11th Japan time and the 10th Central time. And then right after that, we have a Progress 34P undocking that needs to occur, which is in the window for the HTV, and also a Soyuz launch and docking during this period. And so, again, it's a busy period in the program. As we look at the window of the H-2 transfer vehicle, it has a window from the 11th to the 30th, or you look at the 10th to the 30th of September. After that period, the next window doesn't open up until early next year, and so we're going to make every attempt to get it off the ground during that period. The window provides, due to a number of constraints that we work through, on the order of about 7 opportunities. There's a certain amount of time between each attempt to reload and get the range back, but on the order of about 7 attempts in those 20 or so days we have in September. So we have a good chance to get it off in time in this window and not have to delay further the HTV. So we're looking forward to that capability to ISS. In addition, the H-2 transfer vehicle is an extremely capable vehicle. Overall, if you look at what it can take to orbit, it's something on the order of about 4.5 metric tons internally and about 1.5 metric tons externally. That's total cargo, including the carriers, any flight support equipment that has to fly to support the ORUs that fly. On this particular flight, we've got about 2.5 metric tons of pressurized cargo flying to orbit, and almost a metric ton of payloads externally coming to ISS. So it's a significant amount of upmass to us, and it's providing not only important logistics for the crew, which is a major part of the pressurized capability, but also a couple of, quite a bit of payloads. I think about almost 20% of the pressurized volume is research hardware. But also the 2 payloads externally are very unique and new capabilities for ISS. There's been quite a bit of talk about the use of ISS for Earth research. And in fact, the 2 payloads flying, one JAXA, one NASA, are intended, in fact, to do that very thing. One referred to as HREP, and I'll just leave it at that. It's an acronym for a very long, drawn-out name for a payload. Is designed to not only study the oceans from Earth's orbit, but also to map the ionosphere and the thermosphere to better understand the makeup of the atmosphere. And the other one, referred to as SMILES, is a JAXA payload, and it's specifically meant to study the effect of trace gases on the ozone layer to help better understand how we affect the ozone layer through differing events that take place here on Earth. And so those are very critical things for us to understand relative to understanding our environment and how we affect it. And it's good to be able to finally start having this kind of research on board ISS. Our JAXA colleagues have conducted a number of reviews. We had our internal flight readiness review here just recently. And I can tell you from a development standpoint, this vehicle is well ready to fly. There's very few open, we refer to them as open pieces of paper. They're basically reflects work that's left to be done. All of it pre-planned work, meaning that in this stage of where you are in the process, these are the kinds of steps that are left to take place, and so you can't really get them done any quicker than that. Virtually all of the certification paper has been closed, and the team's ready to fly. Our JAXA colleagues will have their FRR tomorrow night, our time, followed immediately thereafter by a launch readiness review, and that's all looking forward to the launch on the 11th. The final thing I'll tell you is that the HTV vehicle itself is encapsulated in its shroud and has been moved to the vehicle assembly building and is currently being attached to the H-IIB rocket. And so we're well on schedule, and we're not working any issues relative to its launch. And so with that, there's quite a bit of choreography associated with flying these vehicles, especially the first-time vehicle, because of the checkout we do as we approach the ISS to ensure that all of the systems on board are working as we had planned. And Dana's been doing this with her JAXA counterpart for some time now, and she's here to talk us through what's going to occur on orbit. So Dana?
Thanks, Mike. Good afternoon. This is a really exciting time for us with the current ongoing mission and with the HTV launch next week. There are a number of people at NASA, JAXA, and CSA that have been working for many, many years waiting for this moment. So everyone's anxiously awaiting this first mission. HTV also brings with it a number of first-time operations for the International Space Station. As you heard, it's the first unmanned vehicle that brings with it both pressurized and unpressurized cargo. It can carry ORUs or payloads, and for this mission, we've got 2 payloads on board. It's also the first unmanned vehicle that'll be going to the U.S. segment, and it's our first free flyer capture from the International Space Station. The JAXA teams have done a fantastic job getting the hardware and the rocket ready. CSA has also done a lot of work to help make enhancements on board to enable the SSRMS to do this capture. JAXA's also built a new control center. I've got a photo of it. You're looking at the HTV Ops Control Center. This is actually in the same building as the GEM Control Center at the Scuba Space Center, but it is a different facility. They're also using a different flight control team for this operation. The facility came online a little over a year ago, and they've been using it since then to do both training and some real-time operations with equipment that they currently have on board. In terms of flight control teams, I am the lead flight director. I'll be working the rendezvous and capture phase of the mission, also ingress and then transfer of the 2 payloads. Orbit 1 is Ron Spencer. He's working the shift right before me. He'll also be working rendezvous and then HTV's release and departure. The Orbit 3 flight director is Derek Hossman. He'll be working HTV berthing and activation. On the JAXA side, the lead flight director is Koji Yamanaka. He is my counterpart. He'll be on console with me for the rendezvous and capture. He's got a lot of experience with guidance and navigation systems and also with satellite rendezvous. The second JAXA flight director is Dai Aso. He is their lead for the attach phase portion of the mission. He'll be working alongside Derek Hossman to do HTV berthing and activation. The third flight director is Kota Tanabe. He works both the rendezvous and attach phases, and his background is a comm specialist. The fourth flight director is Takashi Uchiyama. He is the lead for the exposed pallet, which is what carries the payloads up to orbit. So he'll be working with me as my counterpart during those unpressurized cargo transfers. On board the station, 4 of the 6 crew members will be heavily involved in this mission. Nicole Stott, the top left corner there, will be doing the actual track and capture. Frank DeVinne will be a rendezvous officer, which is basically a new role that we have to monitor HTV as it approaches. He's also the prime operator for the GEM RMS, and he'll be operating the common berthing mechanisms. Bob Thirsk is the primary arm operator for HTV berthing and unberthing. He'll also be inserting and extracting the exposed pallet. Mike Barrett is one of our contingency EVA crew members in case we had to do an EVA